Okay, welcome everybody to the post LPX review. My name's Ben, taking over for Karen Stiles, who usually holds this meeting after you've submitted your LPX results. We're going to get started while the group is still small enough I don't lose my nerve. I think we've got a small enough group today. If you do have questions, just feel free to interrupt me. As we're going through this, we're just going to kind of run through the LPX. I've got my list of results here from NPHL. And so we'll correlate rule outs and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, here's what we're doing today. I'm going to give you a couple of resources if maybe you didn't know were available to you. They are on our NPHL website. But I'll show you where you can find those in just a minute. We're going to kind of go through the LPX step by step, but I'll keep it quick. Don't worry. You're going to see some different screenshots of the LRN bench guides. I'm sure most of you are familiar with. There's a couple of different ones out there that actually I was unaware of until I came over here to NPHL. So I'll show you some of those, and then we're going to talk about the gram stain, the colony morphology, and all those spot tests that we use in our rule out and refer procedures. So we'll move on. So here is where you can find a couple of those extra bench guides. That top one there, the long arrow, is the one that you have probably in your lab, the red cover. The APHL bench guide is a similar bench guide to the NPHL. And the APHL Blue Book there at the bottom, that is a 300+ page document listing everything from, it's got your algorithms, it's got packaging and shipping, it's got biosafety concerns, biosecurity concerns. That really is your go-to all-in-one document if you ever have any questions about biosecurity or rule out and refers. Here's the NPHL bench guide. This is the APHL bench guide. This is the front cover. And then here's what the Blue Book looks like. If you want to circumnavigate the NPHL website, you can just Google APHL Blue Book and you can usually find a link just directly to that. This is the APHL bench guide, BSL-3 practices, being ready to handle those potential BT organisms. So this is for your reference. These slides will be shared. Here's some of the common spot tests that we're using in the LPX. I believe in some of these we would have been doing, oxidase, catalase, beta-lactamase, motility. The tube catalase, which is different than the bench catalase. In the bench catalase, you just kind of smear some on, or at least I use. So you smear some on a slide and drop a little catalase on there and see what happens. You want to kind of avoid aerosolizing these organisms. So on the picture on the right here with the green stick, you can see it's kind of being smeared on the side of the tube with the catalase in the bottom. And then you roll that to get the catalase to roll over the organism and watch your reaction inside the tube, inside the hood, of course. This is still done inside the hood. So let's get started. Here's our LPX-01. A 36-year-old exotic pet store worker with the rash. How fun. These are the questions that we're going to be answering as we go through this: the media, the growth, the gram stain. So the media used here at NPHL for all three of these, they said a blood, a chocolate, and a McConkey, kind of standard. For this first one, we only had growth on the blood and the chocolate. So we only had growth on the blood and the chocolate. Growth on the blood was noted to be beta hemolytic, and no growth on the McConkey. On their gram stain, they noted gram-negative coccobacilli. We had some people saying cocci. They're kind of, the gram-negatives, they can be kind of tough. Those coccobacilli get very tiny. We have a a gram stain webinar for your reference if you're ever having trouble, or you could just reach me directly. Okay, so before we get started with our spot tests, maybe at this point we've realized, if we're working it up on the bench, that this should be moved to the hood. So before we start the spot test, we've got slow growing gram-negative bacilli, or coccobacilli, that does not grow on MAC. So that's going to move us over to our right-handed column there. And now we're thinking, well, we might have Brucella, Burkholderia mallei, or Francisella tularensis. So we know, being the great bench techs that we are, that we're moving this under the hood to perform all future testing. Here's a little rundown. This can be found in our NPHL hazardous pathogen bench guide with some examples of the gram stains there. This, also from our NPHL bench guide, is kind of the guide we're going to be using today. So from our gram stain and growth, we know we're looking at Burkholderia mallei, Francisella tularensis, and Brucella. And so if we move right across the list, we've got variable growth in the McConkey for Burkholderia and Brucella. No growth for the Francisella. We had no growth on our MAC. So now we're kind of leaning toward Francisella. Next test that was done here was the catalase, which they noted as catalase negative. And we had oxidase negative as well, but catalase negative, you see on our chart here, we have a weak positive for catalase. So at this point, if you did the catalase and it was negative, we can rule out Francisella, which is indeed what NPHL used to rule out Francisella. The oxidase they used to rule out Burkholderia mallei and Brucella, because those would both have somewhat of a positive, but negative catalase, we've ruled it out. And then this is again the NPHL bench guide. You can see we had slow growth on the chocolate and blood. So this is where we moved to the biosafety cabinet. Oxidase negative, catalase weak positive. Ours was negative. The beta-lactamase, we never made it that far. But you'll note here, if we go back a slide, that beta-lactamase, tularensis is the only organism we're going to have over here that's beta-lactamase positive. So that is an immediate indicator that you can't rule out tularensis, and you should contact NPHL. But in this case, tularensis ruled out by catalase. Continue bench workup just at the bench under normal circumstances. Okay. So when working with this organism, the trigger points we saw, we had the slow growth, the gram stain, and the no growth on McConkey are all trigger points to move your work under the hood. Scene 2, we have a wound with a 49-year-old heroin skin popper with erythematous infection of right gluteal region. That's a tough one. Again, the questions we're going to be asking and answering as we move forward. So once again, we use our standard culture setup, blood, chocolate, McConkey. And in this case, we also only saw growth on the blood and chocolate. So then we'll look at our gram stain, which is gram-positive bacilli. So at this point, before we move on, we kind of know what we might be anticipating, because there's only one gram-positive rod on our hazardous pathogens list here. It's Bacillus anthracis. And so with the gram-positive bacilli, we immediately know, especially a large gram-positive rod that may or may not be showing spores. It's going to grow pretty quickly on the blood and the chocolate. So when you see those large gram-positive rods from, that's when you might be thinking move it under the hood. You should probably move it under the hood at that point. No growth on the McConkey. Here at NPHL, we noted no hemolysis on the blood plate, which is a dead giveaway. You want to move it under the hood. With a large gram-positive rod with no hemolysis, you want to move it under the hood. Our bacillus is up top here, gram-positive rod, growth on blood, growth on chocolate. We noted that it was catalase positive. So at this point, we cannot rule out Bacillus anthracis. And it's after the catalase, we would move to the motility. I want did if anyone could just pop into the chat, did your lab use the motility in this scenario? Or did you use the morphology gram stain? If we don't get an answer, that's okay. Christy said motility, yes. Okay, so yeah, so I clicked out of my screen. So the motility for anthracis is negative. So we've got our examples of motility here, left positive, right negative. So most of you, it looks like we're seeing a negative motility because most everyone called this into NPHL, which is good. So cannot rule out Bacillus anthracis. We're going to call NPHL. We're going to send them the isolate. They're going to take it into the BSL3 and confirm. The trigger points seen was really the gram stain was the big one here. We saw a gram positive, so we weren't really expecting any growth on the MAC. It doesn't have to be a sterile site, and it does not grow slow. So really the gram stain was our big giveaway here, and Caitlin used morphology and motility. Okay, very good. We will move on. We're just flying through these here. LPX3, lymph node aspirate, a 12-year-old from Colorado with sudden onset fever, headache, and a swollen lymph node. Okay, so the questions we're going to ask and answer. Again, same media used on all three. Growth here, this time we have growth on all three plates, the blood, the chocolate, and the McConkey. NPHL noticed that the growth on the blood was non-hemolytic, and that on the McConkey, it was a lactose non-fermenter. In our gram stain, we got a gram-negative rod, gram-negative bacilli. So before we move on, we can, ask ourselves if there's any kind of BT organisms we can lean toward just with the information that we have. I don't know that this would necessarily be slow growing, but it's a gram-negative rod that grows on the MAC. So that's gonna lead us toward our left hand of the slide over there, the Burkholderia pseudomallei and Yersinia pestis. So Yersinia, we're looking at Burkholderia pseudomallei and Yersinia pestis, number 2 and 3 on our chart there on the left. We've got growth on all three plates. That checks out here. So here we're going to do catalase positive for both, doesn't rule it out. Let's see here. So NPHL started with the catalase positive for both, so we're still looking at each of them. They did the oxidase test next, which their oxidase was negative, but pseudomallei would be positive. So now we're really leaning toward Yersinia pestis. They tested the growth at 25 degrees. I'm hoping most labs here used their motility. And can you tell me, did you do motility at both 25 degrees at room temp and an incubator? Because that's one of our keys for Yersinia. Okay, so 35. Get back. Did anyone do the motility at room temp? I'm just curious because if you see here, Yersinia pestis is the only one of the Yersinia species that will be negative for motility at room temp. So if you run them both, all were negative. Yeah, that's good. So if you run them both, any other Yersinia species will be positive motility at room temperature except for pestis. So that is one of our key takeaways for the motility. So Carrie said, yep, both 25, 35, all were negative, which you should have had negative at 25 and 35, because most labs called in and said, yes, they were unable to rule out Yersinia pestis. And so that triggers your contact of NPHL and sending us the isolate where we take it to the BSL-3 and finish the identification. So trigger points here, this one, I'd say the trigger points would be a little bit harder, I guess. Slow growth for Yersinia. The gram stain and the growth on MAC kind of look standard gram-negative rod. So a little more difficult. Probably patient history was a big giveaway here. If you notice, she had swollen lymph nodes, or a swollen lymph node, which would be kind of classic for Yersinia pestis, the plague, the bubonic plague, buboes, swollen lymph nodes. So here at the end, responsibilities of the Sentinel laboratories. So really it is very important that Sentinel labs recognize the trigger points and move these under the hood as soon as they see those to prevent exposure to more laboratorians, more departments. Want to try to keep these under control. And then there is a little checklist in the back here. I think most labs seem to have pretty good procedures in place. We had like 95% people responding with all the correct rule outs and call-ins. So let's say that works well. And then a reminder that we don't want to put these on the MALDI. Right away, we want to use all of our, until you have ruled it out definitively, avoid all the automated identification tests. These are just some examples of positives and negatives for reference. Positive on the right, negative on the left. And then again, the motility with the, this time, positive on the left there and negative on the right. And then, so I was just going to open it up to people to see if anyone had anything to ask me. Just give a couple more seconds for questions. That was short and sweet. I hope that went well. Next time, we will still be offering the LPX review. Next time, I don't think it's going to be immediately after you submit your results, but I might wait until I get your results from CAP. So I can see exactly how everyone did. And then I'll have, so it might just be pushed back a couple of months, but it might be a good opportunity if you forgot performing the LPX survey, or you forgot your operating procedures when it comes to BT organism, just pop on in, we'll review. So if there are no questions for me, I will end it there. Thank you for everyone who participated, who called in with your rule outs, your referrals, and to those who sent in your shipper's declaration as well. We like to keep track of who knows how and what to ship. So without anything else, that's it. You are free to go.